without further ado, panelists and guests, I'm so excited. We have a phenomenal topic today that, again, just goes right into the topic that we were kind of talking about. And then just as a whole, the human experience is phenomenally challenging. Choosing my words wisely. It's phenomenally challenging, and it offers a lot of opportunity for growth. But, you know, how can we best tackle these challenges? How can we take the uncertainty that we're constantly experiencing and make do with it? And today's topic, we're talking about from crisis to golden leadership. So times of crisis often challenge us and bring out our best qualities, or sometimes our not so best selves, if you will. And what can we do to look at that, resist that fight or flight response that can be triggered, and move forward in a productive and constructive manner? That's my little Nessa version of what we're looking at today. But what we're going to be talking about is how we can consciously choose to connect with our humanity, connect with our purpose, how we can maximize our leadership potential by treating others the way that they wish to be treated, which is ultimately the way that we want to be treated, right? Because we're all looking in that mirror all the time. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to one of our panelists here, Miss Susannah, and we can talk a little bit more about golden leadership and get to know our panelists. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited. It is all yours.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nessa. We're thrilled to be here. I know all three of us are. And I think Nessa really explained this, you know, what we're going to be talking about here today, that in these times of crisis and challenge, we are often put into a state of fight or flight, which puts us into a contracted state of consciousness. And as leaders, it is so, so important that we remain in that expanded state of consciousness, but they also give us the opportunity to choose to be that way. And then to kind of work on our own well-being, which then reflects in the relationships that we build with other people and our communities. So with that little intro, I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves, to tell you a little bit more about the incredible things that these people have done in their lives to be golden leaders and to connect with their own purpose and humanity. So Tiffany, do you want to get us started and tell our listeners what you're all about?
Sure. First of all, I'm so excited to be here and sharing space with the three lovely souls, and also everybody who is joining in. Thank you for joining. So I'm going to quote my friend Brandon here. This is his, but I feel identify with this. I am a recovering type A and an aspiring type B. So my past expression, I used to be a ex-startup founder, ex-Fortune 50 corporate executive, and now I'm on the other side, a Dharma practitioner and also a social entrepreneur. I'm working on building a nonprofit at tech startup to provide wellness education for everyone for free. Very, very inspired by Saul and Khan Academy, would like to do the same for personal wellness and health. And so our mission is to empower everyone to live their higher self.
I'm just really excited to hear more from you, Tiffany. It's been amazing to have been able to connect with the people in this life, and I think that you are one of those people that was really brought into my existence in sort of a synchronous divine way. So it's really beautiful that you're here. Thank you. Oscar, you want to tell us more about all the incredible things that you've been up to?
Hey, Susannah. Yeah, of course. I don't know what my profession is these days, but I spent 23 years in the Navy submarine force, where I started my lessons of leadership and studying leadership and understanding people. And then I spent about a year at the Federal Communications Commission. Following that, I've been working for Facebook globally, assisting with diversity work, workforce development, and then part-time I do some political work, some community organization type work. And now during the pandemic, I'm just focusing on making sure I do my best to help keep us connected and have these sort of conversations. So the world is open at this point. So.
Well, as usual, Oscar, you are incredibly humble and overly modest, I think. Oscar has run for political office in the recent history. He has been a huge community organizer across states and for Facebook Inc., the global, very, very large global organization, and has been a champion for diversity and inclusion there. And that's actually where he and I met. So, so stop being so modest, Oscar. But I'll tell you all a little bit about me. I'm your host for this really exciting panel. My name is Susannah Stokes. I am coming at you from Asheville, North Carolina, but I am bi-coastal. I split my time between San Francisco and here. And my background is I was in the Marine Corps for about 5 years, did a couple of deployments to Afghanistan, and then coming out of that, realized that I really wanted to take a more peaceful route for the rest of my life. Joined Facebook, did a lot of work in diversity and communications there, and slowly but surely found my way into building a leadership nonprofit called Do Unto. And so I founded that, and a lot of these discussions are inspired by the work and the research that we do at Do Unto to encourage people to, by empowering them to live and work by the golden rule, because we believe that now, more than ever, we need leaders who treat people with dignity and respect, no matter who they are and where they are in the world. So I think that really leads us into our first question, because me being in the Marine Corps, we had a very, very particular definition of leadership, of what the best leader looked like. And ironically, I always felt like I didn't quite fit that definition. So I'd love to know from our panelists, how did we define leadership, and what's starting to change in that definition? And maybe we'll start with Oscar. You want to give us some of your thoughts?
Yes, of course. Everybody on the panel is so brilliant. I hate to go first because that gives them the opportunity to come up with this brilliant answer behind it. Just kidding. So leadership, yeah, that's a living and breathing word, a living and breathing function in your life. And I think it's important for all of us to identify who we are as leaders as early as possible, because when you start talking about, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, when you start talking about leadership, all of us at some point in our lives have to tap into our leadership abilities, no matter where we are in life. So for me, I have looked at leadership as a muscle that has many parts that some I'm great at, some I'm not so good at, and the ones I'm not so good at, I have to work and put a lot of time and effort and attention in those spaces. What I also found out, what I've also thought a lot about and came to understand, is that most things needed of a leader are written in a book somewhere. You can develop these principles, you can develop strategies to implement leadership, you can develop techniques, all those things, they're written somewhere. So it's easy to develop most leadership techniques that you need to make an organization successful. The space that is the toughest is that space in the emotional IQ section. What is the emotional health of your organization? What is the emotional health of your leadership tactics. And when I say emotional health of your leadership tactics, what is the culture? What sort of culture does your leadership tactics affect on your command, on your organization, even on your household? So for me, leadership is a muscle that you must continue to work. You must rate certain sections of leadership, giving yourself a A, B, C, or D in those sections, and continue to work and grow, connect with other leaders, and be brave enough to be your own leader. Don't allow certain standards to come in and say leadership has to look like this. Leadership just has to be full of love and also full of abilities, techniques, and skills, and all those sort of things. And you just grow it from that point.
That's really, really profound, the emotional IQ piece, right? And I think that we'll get into this more as we discuss. But what a excellent thought of, you know, if we don't have that piece, then you really don't have leadership. You know, you're really not developing people. Tiffany, what are some of your thoughts on this?
Oscar, I love what you said. I just took out pieces of those words, and I think you're so on point. You know, the concept when we say, how do we define leadership, right? These words come to mind. You talked about techniques and practices, right? Tactics and culture. And what just came to me was that when we look at the definition of something, what's in our vocabulary isn't always true, in that it's not what's universal and timeless. What we define to be true is, as you said, Oscar, it's culture. It's what we see, what is heard, and what is experienced, right? And so leadership, when I think of what has been taught to us and what we see outside in society, it's very much to do with, we are taught that leaders are leaders by virtue of power and position. And so there is this aspect of control and command mannerism. And I know from my experience, I used to think that that's what leader was. And fortunately for me, that understanding, that limited understanding, was one of the most important mistakes that I made early on in my career. Thinking that I had to accumulate accolades and accomplishments, that I was going after the mission, I forgot about the most important aspect of what earned me my position in the first place. And to Oscar's point, it is, you know, the muscle. And when I think about that muscle, that's within, and that's not the external tactics and practices. It is what is within on the emotional side. So to answer your question, Susannah, I think that the true definition of leadership, and from my perspective, has never changed with time, past or present. You know, it is the sort of the, as Eckhart Tolle would say, our mind is the possessive entity. So it's more of the mind who has defined it incorrectly, and it is our society who has turned that and promoted that culture and it become our pursuit. So, you know, when I think of great leaders of past and present, I believe that great leaders are those who build collective success, and they leave positive footprints wherever they go. And that does not change with time, right? They ignite within and not under. We've had leaders that do that, and that is not fun. Yes.
Yeah, we've seen that. We continue to see that, actually. And I think the point of leaders igniting collective success, as it comes from this muscle of emotional intelligence and caring about others, right? And we'll actually be getting into even servant leadership, you know, that concept of servant or service leadership later. But, you know, with these in mind, what is the leadership that we need today? What does it look like? This world that we live in, this 21st century world, while the tenets of leadership on the spiritual or the being level may be the same, what are some of the tactics and techniques that our modern leaders really need to activate or embody? And I'll let you guys hash it out on who goes first on that one.
Well, maybe I'll kind of start with this. You know, I think about the time that we're living in and this concept of VUCA, right? The world is a lot more volatile, complex, and ambiguous. And so more than ever, we've been called to do things that we've never done before. We're asking to build things we've never built. And even, you know, now with the pandemic, coming up with cures for diseases we've never seen. And in times like these, I believe that people, at least I speak on for myself, we look for leaders, and that requires somebody that we can trust, right? And we're all inspired by vision, by levels of hope, and that we can somehow see and conceptualize a better world than the way that it is now. And the traditional notion of leadership, this is of I say and you do, the model of, you know, a genius with 1,000 helpers, that just doesn't work anymore. You know, people are inspired by why. They have to understand why and be willing to follow. A leader is not a leader unless they're followers. But if we ourselves are not inspired, then we can't inspire others. And for me, what is inspiration other than the word being in spirit? Right? Inspiration is being in spirit, and that comes back to the heart, which is a source of authentic power. And in my career, what I've seen as leaders are the quiet movers and shakers. There are the, you know, the way showers. They are the trailblazers. I mean, these are the people who can really rally and mobilize, and they lead without authority, because at the end of the day, they're one who can create and pull together an environment where it allows everybody to shine through. And that kind of inspiration can't be false. You know, I think great leaders inspire change. So when we look at 21st century today, I think we see that example of us everywhere. And I believe that that's somebody who's really, really connected within themselves first and foremost. And that aspect, leadership, is very personal. I don't think that there's one secret recipe, although there are successful criteria that makes one somebody that one would want to, you know, follow. Yeah.
Oscar, tell us what techniques and tactics do you think are really powerful today?
Yeah, today, that's a really loaded question, you know, today. So for me, today is about evaluating and taking personal responsibility. And what I as a leader, you know, evaluating and taking personal responsibility as a leader. First of all, you know, we have a short period of time on this earth to contribute what we're going to contribute to the workforce, to the world, to our professional lives, and what mark we're going to make on this earth. And if you're a leader and change agent at large organizations, or you're leading people, or you're leading cultures, or any of those things, you got to take a look and say, this is a evaluation of the work I've put forth these past 20 some years. When the world has to stop, and you go back and you measure, okay, this is what I've been doing, all of my talents, all of my skills, this is what I've been giving to the earth. Am I proud of that? What responsibility do I share when the world has to respond to a pandemic and I am a leader in that place? I'm also a leader in my family. Have I properly implemented leadership skills and tools and all those things in my life, so that today I'm proud of the work that I've done with those organizations? And I also have to evaluate my relationship with that organization and the direction it's going, because now, again, after the pandemic, we'll go back and we'll look at this again, and 10 years from now, I'll be saying, what did I do with my life at this point? How did I affect change? How did I make things better? And this is a difficult thing, because the things that we're trying to change is in an area that most leaders don't have time to think about and have not made a priority. So when you say you're going to try to effect change on a huge system, these are things we've been talking about for centuries. You know, when you quote, I always call his name Eckhart Tolle, but I think he pronounced it a little bit different. But you know, a lot. I love his writings because he talks about a new earth. He talks about us being connected, and a lot of the things he talks about, we can't deny today. There is a lot of noise about where we should be going, where we should focus our attention. Do we hate each other, and all those things? But the difference between us is small, and the conversation is simple. And the solutions are simple, but we tend to drown them in political BS, also corporate BS, and all those sort of things. But I think this pandemic has shaken us, and also shown that we're not that divided. And some of us who are true leaders, not those folks who are out leading. There's a difference between leaders and people who are in leadership positions. At times. So those of us who are true leaders, who really care about the world and people and being responsible, I think a lot of us are waking up and seeing that we have more responsibility, and that the corporate ladder and the normal way of doing business and the normal way of going after a professional career is not enough for us to rest on in our souls. So that, I think, is where I'm focused today. Sorry if I rambled quite a bit.
Not at all. Both of you are, have really brought up some super valuable points here about, first of all, Oscar, your point about there's a lot of complexity that's been created just for the sake of creating complexity in our world. And sometimes these times of crisis really kind of focus our attention on the things that really matter, right? And so if we are leaders and we truly care about other beings and the future of our species and our world, then we can look to people who lead from within, like Eckhart Tolle and some of these other great teachers, to hone in on the things that really matter. And there's been a good little discussion here in the chat about VUCA, which is something that Tiffany mentioned. And VUCA, for those of you who may not know, is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think it's worth having a quick little side discussion here about, one of our listeners asked, hasn't it always been a VUCA world? And I would pose to both of you, why do we see this world as being more or less or differently, afflicted by VUCA than in the past? Or is it?
I'll go.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, my mute's already off. I would say that, we have always been, the world of the unknown. When I think of the movie Braveheart, or even when Columbus set sail, there's always been unknown. Anything that is unknown is relatively VUCA in nature. Yet, I think what's happening in our society is that we've taken the wrong turn. We've become a society focused a lot more on material progress, material productivity, right? We define a lot of our, whether it's individual society or as a nation, right? GDP as an example. So while we have more data, we probably have less insight. While we have more knowledge, we have less wisdom. And it's to the point where I believe, to some certain extent, our rationalism has perhaps robbed us from the sacredness of things that, for example, that cannot be measured, that are the immaterial, which perhaps our ancestors have known all along, which is that the intelligence of the heart perhaps is more powerful than the mind. To that extent, the world that we have now is one where, we have making a lot of, I would like to consider them sacrifices, right? Long-term sacrifices in exchange for immediate gratification and immediate gains. So there's plenty of example, I think, even in the recent presidential debate, not going into politics, but there's many examples that we should brought up around science and climate change, etc. So my sense is that while the world can be more VUCA, we have perhaps lost our way in terms of understanding truly what is important and sacred in life, right? And to that extent, who we are and our purpose as human beings. And yeah, so that's my thought, my 2 cents there.
I love that. Oscar, do you have thoughts on, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, these things that may be more or less experienced today?
Yeah. We have always, I would agree that we've always lived in that world. Tiffany mentioned short-term, long-term decisions for short-term gains. We have also done that for a long time. But I think today today represents an opportunity, right? An opportunity to decide how we want to move forward. And if the world moves forward and with a bunch of volatility and in a place where we forget a lot of folks and we don't invest in the future of a large segment of people, one thing for sure is history sort of repeats itself, and we as a world and as people have a responsibility to each other. And in those times where we'll continue these sort of cycles, but I do believe that there's a tipping point where those folks who you leave unrepresented, not taken care of or considering for the long term, eventually something happens. The unrest, they don't believe in the vision of the country, they don't believe in the vision of the world, and that's what most of us, that's what keeps most of the thing, that's what keeps order, really. The vision and the belief in the pursuit of happiness. You got to believe that from where you are, you can be successful, or you can lead your family to happiness. The teens, the young folks, they don't believe us anymore, because the short-term decisions with the long-term impacts are leaving them without opportunity and leaving them with the debt, with the bag, all those things. So they just don't believe us anymore. So we can continue down that path, and I think some of us will be just fine. But I don't see us maintaining this sort of order in the world unless we make some major changes to include other folks and also to bridge the conversation between our differences.
That was really powerful, Oscar. And I think that bridging the gaps of our differences and being more inclusive is such a big thing of being a golden leader, right? Because we would want someone to do that for us too. If we were feeling excluded, or if we were on the other side of the river and we couldn't get over, we would want someone to reach out and to help us across. So that sort of leads us into our next phase of this discussion, which is like, what are some of the success characteristics of a modern golden leader, of someone who is perhaps more inclusive or bridges those gaps? What does that kind of person look like today? And how can we begin to uncover that in ourselves? And I would love, Oscar, for you to kind of keep going, because I think that you were on a great track there.
Yeah, what we're looking for in a leader today, it it depends on what we want, right? I've experienced the world the way that I've experienced the world as a Black man, African American male, or whatever the title or the block is that I'm supposed to check, but that is the way that I have experienced the world. So after experiencing the world, I need something different from a leader. I need them to be a little more connected to who I am, where I came from, how I grew up, who my family is. That is the only way that you really will get me. We probably won't make it to a place where we can do things to change the world, because I'm different, in terms of who I am as a person. I grew up in the streets, projects, all those things. So that's who I was coming up. I didn't choose to grow up that way. That's who I am. So I graduated high school under the conditions that I graduated high school. I learned about the world from that perspective. So when I graduated, there were 5 of me that graduated just like this. All great males, all great, 5 great Black males, compassionate, love the world, love people, all those things. I'm the only one who didn't go to prison, experience jail time, all those sort of things. So today, I'm looking for a leader that would see someone like me and understand that I bring leadership to the table as well. It may sound different, but we're trying to solve the same problem, and my approach may bring something brilliant to the process, just as well as your approach may bring some brilliant things to the process. So I'm looking for leaders who are listening different, who have different responsibilities and want to do some different things in the world. So for me, if my daughter is leaving for the Navy here in a few weeks, and I have a son that's currently in the Navy, and they are all transitioning to college or going to the Navy at this point. And I am telling them to connect to a good person, and you'll find you a great leader. Because first of all, they're not going to play in an arena where there's not great leaders, and they don't have the opportunity to find more than one great mentor or be a part of great organizations, because I'm going to make sure that they have all the tools that are necessary to join any organization on the planet. But I want to make sure they get behind initiatives that feed their soul, that brings people together. And I want them to evaluate those CEOs and the leaders of the organizations to make sure that they also are good people, and the conscience of that company is doing great things for the world. And it's easy to measure that. Most people get lost in that term, great things for the world, but no, keep it simple. And if it makes your conscience feel great and aligns with your principles in life, then you should, follow that sort of leader. A lot there, but that's what I'm thinking about, and that is the sort of advice I'm giving to the next generation of my family.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that reflection. Tiffany, how about you? What are some success characteristics of a modern leader, and perhaps how has your life journey led you to that understanding?
Yeah, what has come to me when you say golden leadership, the notion of golden leadership, for me, the word that comes to mind is authenticity. Someone who is authentic, and authentic is what is real. So the concept that's coming to mind is the I am. Who am I before the world told me who I should be? This is my essence, my childhood essence. And I believe to exercise authentic leadership or golden leadership, there are 3 specific successful characteristics. I think one is the knowing. You know, I was recently watching a documentary called Fantastic Fungi. Love Paul. And one thought that came to mind was, you know, had Paul not embraced his stutter, had he not looked down on the floor, had he not had the courage to develop who he was, to pursue that, we would not have all of the knowledge and wonders that we learn about, you know, mycology. And so the first characteristic of success is the identity of the true self. Do we know who we are truly? Or are we becoming someone that the society expects us to be? Are we mimicking after a leader who is filling some sort of void within us? So I think one is the courage. Any leader for me is anyone who has the courage to develop the potential within themselves. And that starts with the individual. The second characteristic of a golden leader that comes to mind is those who are unwavering in the embodiment of this value, of those values. So as we get to know who we are, you know, it's the ability to show up that way and embody those values consistently, not just when we're having a good day, but even when we feel hurt by something that someone had said, even when we feel vulnerable, even when we are angry, doesn't matter, but showing that consistently and that embodiment in terms of what we give expression to always is the essence of us saying, this is who I am and this is what I stand by. And I think that consistency is what leaders do, because that aspect builds trust. The other thing that comes to mind of a successful characteristic is those who leave footprints. And I know this is more of an impact, not so much of a characteristic, but in my mind, they are quite of the same, because the successful characteristic of those, we talked a little bit about the notion of service leadership, is they're always thinking about the other individual. And to that extent, they're trying to understand what exactly is the ripple effect that I'm leaving. When I show up and when I walk out that door, what residue am I leaving behind? I've seen so many times in my career, particularly in the corporate world, where leaders, after they leave, they actually leave a hole, because they either pluck, you know, the talent that they've created and they take their best talent to the next one, or they come into a new organization, instead of spending time to really cultivate, nurture, and elevate the existing team, right? They go through a workforce reduction. Now, of course, there are certain scenarios, but I believe that in that aspect, successful characteristic is about leaving impact, and those are lasting impact. And I think someone calls it a multiplier effect. Absolutely, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I do also like the term multiplier effect. I toyed a lot with the term exponential when I was looking at founding the organization, because I think the word exponential is really what leaders do, right? We multiply, or a true leader that leads from that authentic place. And I really liked how, Oscar, your sort of response led into Tiffany's, where you were talking about wanting your children, you know, the people who are some of the most important beings in the world to you, to find a leader who aligns with their personal values. And part of that is identifying those personal values, right? Is really knowing who they are authentically. And I think that applies to all of us, that we can't follow the leaders that we truly believe in if we don't understand what we believe in the first place. So at Do Unto, we always believe in doing unto self first. So we have a couple questions from the audience, but I think we have one more question that I'd love for you both to talk about before we get into those. And the last one is, you know, is service leadership. and how can a golden leader use times of crisis in particular to create opportunity for themselves and others by being a servant leader or acting through service leadership. And I think, Oscar, I would actually love for you to start this one off again as well, because your story in the Navy, I'd love for you to share a bit more about that, and how people can embody that servant leadership. And then Tiffany, of course, please share about your service to your missions as well.
Yes, of course, Susannah. So I've thought a lot about this because I want to be clear, and this is Oscar philosophy on leadership. But for me, there are times when you are in situations where you have to make decisions, and there's no consideration of that person's feelings. There's no time to be concerned about group dynamic or any of those things. You just have to make a decision, and you have to execute, and you have to walk out and not necessarily be concerned about how you're making people feel at the moment, because there are times when crises happen, and those are the decisions you make. In my professional career, most crises we had done some preparation for. So in the military, you plan for crisis. So as I've exited the military, everything I execute or plan, I usually try to plan it to the left of anything I think can go wrong, and put mitigators in place and all of those things. So I'm quite a learned leader. So in those times of crisis, I know that there are usually a few small key places that I need to be, because in the crisis, usually 8 out of 10 things are going to happen automatically, because fight or flight, all those things happen. So most things happen automatically. But I want to be very careful about where I am as a leader, because I want to be most effective. In my career, I lost a young man, and this guy, he always sticks out to me when I think about leadership as a service and servitude type of leadership. I advanced really fast in the Navy, so I made it to a leadership position pretty quick. And that is usually, youth and leadership usually equals arrogance, and you make huge mistakes usually, right? So I was pretty arrogant. I thought I understood leadership at a very young age, not understanding that there's a lot more wisdom and time and all those things that comes along with understanding leadership. So the young man, I escorted this young man's body home. I took pride in doing so. I took pride in taking him back to his parents, and felt as though I was absolutely ready to do this, because I made it my mission to understand my people, understand who they were. And I had made it a rule not to give too many orders before I really got to know that person. Anyway, escorting him home, I recognized that I didn't know this young man from a stranger passing by me in the store, and I had spent day after day in very intimate, close conversations with this young man, telling him when to come to work, telling him when to go home, telling him what to wear, telling him when I'm disappointed. I had a ton of responsibility in his life, and he thought about me a lot. So when I got to the young man's home, and I got to talk to his mother, and I understood a lot more about his environment and went into the room that he grew up, I understood that I didn't know anything about this young man at all, and that I had a lot more responsibility in being responsible to those folks who work for me and who I led, regardless of who they are. So the leadership tool I invested in the most from that point was just listening. And I mean, listening is a hard thing to do, because we've talked about this one time before, like meeting strangers, right? We're no longer meeting strangers. When I met this young man, I knew 10 things about him automatically, simply because he met these 10 things, right? I'd seen it before, and I said, okay, I'm a great leader, so let's get started. I can start at number 10, and then I can build from there. But what I didn't understand is those 10 things, he got to tell me. He got to tell me what's most important to him. He got to tell me what motivates him. He got to tell me what he loves. He got to tell me who he loves. He got to tell me why he loved them. You know, those are all things that I don't necessarily have to learn. But if I am a leader and worth my salt, and I'm going to be telling this person when to wake up, go to bed, come home, and be a conversation at their dinner table, then I want to be a good conversation at the dinner table. When that person goes home and talks to his or her wife, I want them to smile when they see me. And when I call, I want them to, you know, be happy that I'm a part of their family and a part of their home. And as a leader, I can do that. No matter what organization I lead, I can do that, because it doesn't take a whole lot of time, just a lot of listening and a lot of doing for your people.
Yeah, and I can attest that Oscar is an excellent listener, because I am a great talker, and he has really embodied that in all of the worlds that I've connected with him in. So great lessons learned. Tiffany, tell us about servant leadership to you. I'm so excited to hear.
Recently, I had a good friend of mine share with me this book called The Second Mountain by David Brooks. And one of the quotes that he had sent to me was very powerful. It said that David Brooks quoted, "If the first mountain is building up the ego and defining the self, then the second mountain is about shedding that ego and losing the self. And so if the first mountain is about acquisition, then the second mountain is about contribution." I think the essence of service leadership is about the second mountain, is about the leader who removes the self from their effort, from their action, from their thought. When I think of the greatest service leader in our times today, and even of the past, right? We all know Mother Teresa. There's no self in that contribution. The greatest educational service leader, if we go into more of the spiritual world, it would be somebody, for example, like Buddha, although there are many. Modern times, there's even think about Martin Luther King, 1963, when we were marching for civil rights movement equality. There was no self for him. The same thing goes with Dharma Master Chen Yen. She leads, Times called her the Army of the Compassionate Army, 10 million volunteers inspired around the world to give unconditionally. So for me, service-oriented leaders are those who understand that the best leaders are also the best followers. They know how to step aside. They know how to create space. They know how to hold space and rally and empower others to be the best that they can be. And so service leadership for me also is understanding those people who understand that leadership in actuality is circular. And to that extent, it is harmonious. And I think of harmony more so as water, right? So if leadership is like water, then it flows, right? It is yielding without being rigid, right? It yields without losing its structure, right? It's not about being pushover, and it glides through obstacles with grace, but it always leaves life-affirming presence after it walks away. And I believe that that's an aspect of service leadership that we can all subscribe to, because we have many great examples. Personally, in my experience, that has also been the case. In my career earlier on, I mentioned, one of the biggest mistakes that I've met earlier on was this need to always prove myself. It came from the aspect of understanding success is all of these things, right? Power, status. And so I climbed as an immigrant from Taiwan, I climbed that proverbial mountain. It was really important for me, right, to prove my worth. When I got to the things that I thought you were supposed to get, it didn't make me feel any more, powerful or whatnot. It wasn't until that I started to come back to what made me me, and putting the focus onto others, creating genuine relationships, understanding that teams is not people that report to you, but teams are those people who, embody and empower a similar mission. And when we came together, and when it was about them similar to us, when we started to understand, what makes them tick, what makes them come alive, what can I do to make them better, in the way that they want to be, about holding space and not trying to judge the outcome and control and will my way, was when things started to turn. We had a beautiful and many fortunate opportunity to work with people on my team who were way smarter than I was. And I'm still, amazed to this day by some of the talent that I see. And, and I believe that true leaders in this case requires no hierarchy to lead. And I think that's what service leadership looks like in my mind.
And Tiffany, in her true spiritual self, is also incredibly humble and modest about her growth of wisdom and knowledge as someone who is young, but also embodies such knowledge that probably would take many lifetimes to achieve. And a lot of that has been through her own selfless service toward lots of organizations around the world. And tell us just a little bit about the organization that you focus primarily on.
Yeah, so right now, a few of us are coming together to build a organization, nonprofit, social impact peace project, to really help anyone around the world live life true to their essence. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times, if we think about superior knowledge or privileged resources, and tools and resources that are allocated to those who perhaps have the ability to gather, we imagine a world similar to Khan, where all of us can have Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, behind our back, rooting for us through our life event, traversing through life's journey. These could be multidisciplinary, multicultural teachings and modalities that is from the ancient to the modern. And I feel that form of, education on the values of the heart, right, on true wellness, well-being of the mind, body, and spirit, should be accessible to anyone, so that we have the knowledge and the wisdom to unlock what is already within. What we are already whole and complete and perfect. It's a little bit like an excavation process to find out the treasures, and this nonprofit peace project is about bringing all of those to the people and empowering and amplifying those, I call them seated souls like yourself, Susannah, those people who are already doing the work, and bringing this community together so that we can start to scale tailor support for anyone who's seeking wellness. Ultimately is about providing peace and joy to everybody. Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. And we have a couple of really good quotes from our watchers. If you judge people, you have no time to love them, which is the quote by Mother Teresa. And it looks like she also said, I can do things you cannot, you can do things I cannot. Together we can do great things. And I think that that's a beautiful description of of circular and collective leadership. So what I've been hearing from both of you today is that there are some really key aspects of modern leadership that are arising, that we are now becoming more connected to in this time of crisis, and that we can activate within ourselves more. For example, emotional IQ, developing our understanding on an emotional level and an intuitive level of the people that we are leading or working with. We can focus less on positional authority and more on our authenticity of how connected are we to our purpose and values. How much do we embody the integrity that we desire to see in the world? How much are we the change, right? It's non-hierarchical leadership. It's to some extent circular and much more collective. It is about the whole and less about the self. It's about this aspect of servant leadership. There's the beautiful word seva, which is selfless service. It was literally the first tattoo I ever got when I was 19. And it's about doing service with no expectation of any return to oneself. And then I think it's non-judgmental as well. And I think that both of you have shared such powerful reflections on how you have embodied these aspects of modern leadership, and also some techniques of how folks can start to embody this in a time of crisis. So we have a couple questions from the audience, and I'm going to start with this one, which I think is really interesting. It might it's kind of going into a new realm, but Eric asked, when it comes to hiring, what would you look for in a candidate that indicates courage and empathy? And he says that he feels like those are kind of unmeasurable metrics that are also crucial to the performance of a team. Are there specifics that you would look for in their work history, education, resume? What kinds of questions? How would you understand if someone is becoming more empathetic and maybe courageous and has better emotional IQ?
As a person who has spent some time doing some hiring myself, those things are important to me. So I tend to get them to tell me a story. Give me a example where you have had to tap into these attributes, or where you've displayed this sort of behavior. And they can do either one or two things. They can tell you a impactful story where you absolutely can feel it because and if not, tell them to give you two examples. And of one of those examples, depending on how long they've been in the workforce, they should be able to give you some pretty meaningful examples. If not, they should be able to give you some examples where they have not done it so well, where they could have shown better courage and in those places. And I find the second one even better, because I actually, I can say this loosely, I like folks who have made big mistakes. And when they've made those huge mistakes, if I can see or find the value in those mistakes where they gain value, okay, this is where I made the mistake, this is how I am different, and this is how I'm doing things going forward. I fully recognize I could have been more courageous here. So I just get folks to tell me stories. Give me two good examples of where you have had to display courage, and generally they go and they find the two most the best two examples that they can find. And if you can't find courage in those examples, that may be a yellow flag.
I love that, Oscar. I'm so with you about the stories. It's so important. Competency and hard skills aside. I think those are table stakes for today. So we'll leave them. I think when we look at hiring, for me, what I started to understand is, it's really important to find the innate skill sets, and those character traits are very difficult. But it can be, you can see them through storytelling. So for me, I think when I'm hiring, I'm looking for people who believe in audacious dreams, that they're curious, they're resourceful, that they can command a room without title. So in business words, we look for cross-functional leadership. That would be an aspect of that. And for those who have been able to do that, they have to be self-actualized. A lot of what we talked about earlier has been about leadership from within, not from having budget controls and position and that kind of stuff. I have found that introspective questions are the best way to suss that out. A couple of the questions that I used to ask is, what are you most proud of in your life and why? Or, tell me what is the greatest accomplishment in your career, and talk through all of the environments that lead up to that. Those two are great because what happens is you start to understand, well, what do they give value to? Like, what is really important to them, and how do they go about pursuing that? What came together? How their thinking process. I think that's a really big thing. The other thing I ask questions are on, what are the 3 biggest lessons in life that you have learned? I'm looking in here for introspection. Is this person somebody who reflects and contemplates? The other question that I would ask also is, what is their superpower? And what is their kryptonite? It shows that somebody has a really good understanding of who they are. If they don't have one, then they don't quite understand the importance and the beauty of teams and how to find complementary skill sets. And that's where teams is where all the magic starts to happen. The other one recently that I've also found is the question of, what is the one thing that inspires you the most? We're looking always for people who are self-generating and self-motivating. And I believe that question provides a lot of insight into what's getting them up and going every day. Even when there is no agenda, when there is no structure, can they put something like that together? So those are just some of the questions that hopefully are helpful from a hiring perspective.
Excellent thoughts from 2 people who have done a lot of hiring and I think can really provide some thoughts on this that are from a place of firsthand experience. And I think the word generating is really great. I was just having a conversation about generative versus regenerative. And I would love to just really quickly get a couple of your thoughts on, how is this modern leadership, or how is this leadership that we can embody that is more collective, that is more circular? How is it regenerative versus generative? Excuse me, I think I meant to say the other way. How is it regenerative, right? How is it regenerative versus generative? And if that doesn't resonate, I can give a quick thought, but regenerative to me seems as if there is this process of kind of what you were talking about before, Tiffany, of when I come into an organization, there's a multiplier effect. There is an effect of not just the effort that I put in, but the effort that I put in as a leader then inspires others, which grows, and it creates this exponential kind of process that regenerates over time. And it also heals, right? It heals the organization. So it's not just I come in and I create programs and processes, and then the moment I'm out the door, those are gone. It is an ever-growing, evergreen process that continues, like nature, to cycle and to just get better and to heal itself.
I follow.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm tapping into my my tech world here. So that feels to me a bit of what we say is, a sustainable organization and a scalable one. My personal philosophy on in any role that I take on is, can I work myself out of a job? Can I work myself out of my position? I think that is the greatest determinant of, have you created something that is sustainable, that without your presence, that everybody can function at its highest performance. That means that, we have been able to pull together an environment where everyone can be their best. And I believe that that's aspects of generation and regeneration, which is all of the seeds, the most fundamental aspects of what causes growth is already present without the I, without us being in it. So might be a simple way to think about it, but if I can't work myself out of a job, then I have not done my job.
Exit strategy is everything. What do you think, Oscar?
I think if I got this right, I think, okay, we say generative and regenerative, right? So I think me going to a command is sort of, or going to a job or position is sort of the generative like effect, right? I go in, I make these changes. I'm the person that comes there with this leadership thought. I have that influence. And in order for it to be regenerative, thank you, Susannah. You do this well for me. In order for it to be that way, it has to be my investment in people, because that's the only thing that's the only place you can deposit some true leadership change in different ways of doing business, and it sustains. People can come in and they can change policies, they can change the culture, they can change all those things. When I look back at my naval career, the folks who could barely walk straight and lead or do anything towards leadership, those folks are now in leadership positions. And those things I imparted on them as leadership principles and the way to treat people and all those things are now influencing the US Navy and taking care of America's babies and bringing them up to be leaders the exact same way and care more about the emotional IQ side of leadership. They care more about the love in leadership. Someone had to teach me about love in leadership and how it's not a weak word. It's not a it doesn't hurt the culture where life and death matters. You can still talk about love in leadership. So I've invested those things in people that have worked for me, and I see them doing the exact same thing. So I think the best investment for the long term is in people. For the dynamic change, you go in and you change policies, programs, procedures, and all of those things, and that can be some, more short-term sort of changes. You're on mute.
I'm mute.
Okay. Thank you. That's so true about love and leadership, and I personally agree with it. I do unto our three values are love, live, and lead. And I think that love is the first one because it's the most fundamental. If you do not love yourself and the human race or all beings, then, are you ever really leading anyone? And so I want to ask one last question. And we've had a lot of good questions from the audience and ones that we've thought of, ourselves. And I think this is an interesting one to end on. So where have you, maybe a moment of vulnerability, where have you failed? Is there a time when you failed from leading yourself to building community? And what did you learn from that failure? And sometimes I don't even think of it as failure. I think of it as like, where did you learn the hard way to lead, start from leading self to to leading community on a bigger scale?
I can start
Go
there.
for it, Oscar. Go for it.
Where did I fail? Oh man, let me pick one. So I've failed a lot. I try big things, and I try things sometimes to see if they just work, and there's so many things to learn where we fail. I mean, I just think that I think that's my advantage, is that I'm not an emotional failure. I'm not a person who gets lost in failure. I actually focus, and I look for opportunities to learn, and I look for the bright side of things, because I'm always going to try again. My greatest lesson, and I don't see this as failure, but this is a great example, is when I just ran for county commissioner. I'm not a politician. I'm not. I should not have ran for. Well, in hindsight, I'm glad I did. I learned a lot. But
I'm glad you did.
Yeah. For me, it was. I know for sure I was called to do it. I know for sure I was supposed to be in that place at that time, and what the voice in my head that kept coming to me from all of my life's lesson, all the way from what my father, my grandmother, everyone who's important to me taught me, is that winning is not always about winning. And everybody look at me crazy when I say winning is not always about winning, right? So I jumped and ran for county commissioner. I think I had 3 months left in the race. I lived in Washington, D.C. at the time. I had investment property and homes and all those things in the hometown where I grew up. I knew for sure that I was the perfect candidate for this position. I'm everything that the town needed. So I jumped off the ledge and said, hey, family, I'm going to run for county commissioner. Oh, by the way, I may put my job a little bit at risk. Also, there's a pandemic going on in the world, and the place I want to run for county commissioner is in a hot spot. And oh, by the way, wife, could you please come be my chief of staff and run my campaign, even though you're filled with 17 hours of work a day? Let's go. So that is what I did. And what we learned in that process is that in those communities, county commissioner has to be raised as a position that the most qualified and the most talented folks in the world should be running for county commissioner of every county in the U.S. And that was not the case. So with my background, resources, and the people I knew and the folks that got behind my effort, it raised the standard of who those people are that would run for county commissioner. It also identified that there's a gap in communication in my county. And although, again, my arrogance, I'm the brilliant Facebook guy, resources out of this world, I can go down there and do this easily, no problem. Well, the communication that's required in my county is different. It looks different, it sounds different, and it is brilliant, right? And I had to go figure out how to take global communications that are also brilliant and on a high level, and also how do I connect now and communicate with a community that communicates different and moves different, but it's brilliant and the people are amazing. But my communication style and the communication style of my campaign team failed to connect and make sure that they fully understood what we represented, the reason we were running, what resources we bought, all of those things. So that is my lesson of failure. But from that lesson, from that failure, it was a great goal to try to achieve. And we learned tons, and we changed folks' lives. People are now campaign managers. People are community organizers that were not community organizers before. People are involved in the political process. it changed that process, and that's a win. And that is something I would have never done in my life had I not chose to go fail and run as a county commissioner. It changed my life, and it will change what I do for the world going forward.
Wow, what a lesson. And that realization of, you know, you can have all of this global knowledge of communication, right? And then coming into a local community and realizing that their method of communication is equally brilliant but different, right? And I think that is something that we're learning, is that no large organization will ever be able to fully serve the needs of these smaller communities, because only the communities themselves really know. And that's the listening piece that you talked about earlier.
Yeah,
Oh, so good.
Different but brilliant. I'm glad you got that piece. It's different but brilliant, and most people don't understand the brilliance in communicating with that, in that space. And I'm going to spend more time there.
So good. Tell us, Tiffany, tell us what you've got.
I'm going, oh no, which one? My mother keeps me very humble. Let's just say that. I think the one failure that comes to mind that is relevant to this topic is early on in my career, when, you know, I was afforded an opportunity when I was 25 by Hewlett Packard. It was a district manager, and I somehow caught his eye, and he gave me the position of an executive account manager at HP. And at 25, I believe I was one of the youngest global account managers, managing over $26 million for the business. And I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. So I thought, well, you just tell people what to do. It's their job. My first year was such a humiliating experience. I was put on a performance plan, you know, and for those of you who know, performance plan means you're on your way out. So as somebody who's an immigrant who worked hard and get it, you know, I was working the hardest that I ever had. I remember he used to send me, I would be waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, going to sleep at midnight. I would get emails. So I remember his name, Gabe Lesky. I will never forget. He would write these emails to me on the subject line that says, cease and desist, you know, and the body, he would tell me, Tiffany, go to bed. You're not curing cancer. And I didn't understand why. I didn't understand why after everything that I did, I was being put on a performance plan. I had so much friction with my colleagues. I was drowning in work. I couldn't get things to move. That experience was incredibly humbling, and it brought me back to the notion of the success which I had that got me into this position. I had forgotten about it the moment I stepped into positional leadership. I thought it was about authority. I had given up all of the things that made me, you know, successful in the first place, which is about kindness and compassion and establishing very genuine relationships with people. And so I would say that is one of my biggest, most memorable failure. And I still to this day laugh, because whenever I take things too seriously, I tell myself, I am not curing cancer. It's time to go to bed. So.
Yes, and this element of getting back to our humanity, right? Of our purpose and our humanness, right? I think one of the most beautiful things that's come out of this pandemic is we start to see inside of people's homes on Zoom calls, right? And you see children and dogs and all of these things that start to build a different level of connection and compassion with one another, understanding that fundamentally, no matter how much, you know, how much lipstick we put on a pig or how many suits we put on and walk into the office, we are human beings first. And we will connect with each other on a deeper level when we come from a place of humility. Tiffany, I have had so many experiences like that where I've been put in my place and my egos come out way too much. And it's been a process of that second mountain of really shedding the ego. And I think that is a beautiful lesson for our modern leaders out there. And I just thank everyone for coming to and contributing to this conversation, and for all of our attendees for being so active and asking questions and being engaged, because Oscar was talking about before waking up, and we are all waking up on a global level. So do either of you have any final thoughts for our attendees?
Oscar, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I muted faster than I did.
I would, from a leadership perspective, none of us necessarily get this thing right or perfect, I would say. But I would say make it your mission to get it right, and do a lot of listening, and accept critical feedback, because most of us as leaders, we only hear positive things because of the positional authority that you have. But you have to seek beyond that and go ask questions. So I would challenge all leaders by the end of the year, go find out one thing that you could do better with those that you lead. And you'll be surprised at one thing that you can work on that will make you an amazing leader, and also make your job easier. Because when you learn to connect to people's human needs, Tiffany said this earlier, the qualifications, competencies, all those things generally take care of themselves. There's tools for that as well, but when a person knows that you love them, you generally have their best interests in mind, and you're genuine. And when I say genuine, I mean you really got to use some intrusive techniques to get to know people, to learn to lead them. And if your hiring process is correct, you don't go wrong by showing compassion, love, all those other things that you can then apply. If you can't apply those things, then there's some problems with your hiring process. And you need to go back and fix those things so that you get competent folks that you can show love in leadership.
Beautiful. I love that. For those who know me, know that I love quotes. They're the best. So I'll end also with a quote. There's a saying that the time for change was yesterday, and the time to wake up is now. And the aspect of waking up for me is about waking up to our true self. And that takes courage to develop, and that takes curiosity to go discover. So my greatest hope for everybody is to pursue their true purpose, uncover their limitless potential, and truly create, a world that co-elevates everybody in humanity. So with that, thank you so much, Susannah. It's such a pleasure to be here.
You know where you get that quote from before we end, because that was amazing.
Where was that from?
I don't remember.
Is that from Tiffany Wisdom?
No, that was not for me. I get something before.
Well, we'll have to ask you about that, where that came from, so we can all share it on our Instagrams. I am just so blessed to be connected with beings like you, and I am learning more and more every day. And I am, working hard to surround myself with people who are, who come from a place of love, number one, and to diverse opinion and diverse thought, because I think that those things are really important to the future of our world. So thank you both for taking the time. It's the most valuable asset that you have. And this has just been fantastic. Nessa, do we have anything else?
No, I just in closing, okay. I only have a couple of minutes, so I'm gonna try. I got all my feels going right now, you guys. And everybody who's been joining the session that I've hosted, they're like, oh no, she's about to go off. And yes, I am. First of all, I love you guys. Like, you guys are brilliant. You are beautiful. You're beautiful. And I'm not talking about your beautiful faces. Like, I feel you. I feel you from the middle of the US right now. And I'm grateful for you. What a beautiful topic to get really real about what leadership is and what servant leadership is. It's such a great reminder. And for me, I don't know, as things come up, I think about, like you had mentioned, the courage, the vulnerability that it takes, that we can lead from behind, from the side, from wherever, from the closet, I don't care. Like, we are all, we're all the same. We're all part of the same collective. Like, we have to keep that. We have to hold that close to our heart. I think about, there was something that was said, I won't get it verbatim. I couldn't even actually tell you what it was. But what it came up to me was, as far as letting our ego subside and looking outward. And I thought to myself, the thought that had come up was, in moments where I judge another, or judgment comes up rather, right? In moments where I'm evaluating something from, I think, an external perspective, opposed to coming from inside, I have to remember, we have to remember, I think, that we're all mirrors, right? If I'm looking at somebody else and I'm seeing that they have a need, they're an extension of me. You guys are an extension of me, right? And if you are in pain, well, heck, I'm in pain, right? And so I'm here, and I'm here for you, and I'm here to contribute, and I'm here to create those positive ripples. So I don't know if any of that makes sense. It's just what's coming up right now. But this was beautiful, and you all are brilliant. And I have to say, the mastery, the artistry, and how you guys have framed your perspectives, also a gift. Also a gift. I feel the wisdom that you guys bring, and I feel the love that you bring with every syllable. And again, I am in awe of you. So thank you for showing up the way that you do. We need you. We absolutely need you. And I am so incredibly privileged that I get to do this, because I get to talk to you guys. And I get to hop on my soapbox real quick when I'm just like all in my feels about everything that you guys said. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that was here with us again. Y'all, I love you guys. I'm in my feels. I love you guys. I appreciate you. Thank you for these valuable reminders and insights. And keep doing what you're doing in the world. We need you, and we are the change. So thank you so much for your leadership today. And we'll see you again soon. Bye, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
See ya.